welcome to Q&A on an extraordinary day in politics. I'm Tony Jones, and answering your questions tonight, former Labor Premier of Queensland, Peter Beattie, the Deputy Leader of the Greens, Christine Milne, the National Senate Leader, Barnaby Joyce, Minister for Tertiary Education and Science, Chris Evans, political columnist for The Australian, Janet Albrechtsen, and Kevin Rudd's former media advisor, Lachlan Harris. Please welcome our panel. All right, well, Q&A is live from 9:35 Eastern Daylight Saving Time. It's simulcast on News 24 and News Radio. Go to our website to send a question or join the Twitter conversation using the hashtag that just appeared on your screen. Well, after a week of unprecedented bloodletting, Julia Gillard is confirmed as Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd is pushed to the backbench, and Mark Abib, one of the faceless men who engineered Rudd's removal as PM, has fallen on his sword. Our first question comes from Paige Burton.
Thank you. Does the panel believe that Gillard has been liberated from the Rudd curse, or will this leadership spill continue to haunt the Labor Party to the next election and beyond?
Peter Beattie, we'll go through the whole panel on this quickly. Peter Beattie.
Yes and no. I think that the experience today for the party has been a cathartic experience, and that means at the end of it, there's been so much tension, there were so many exchanges, that everyone was pleased it was over. And they've bound together. You've seen an enormous amount of goodwill from both Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd today. I think what you'll find is that Kevin Rudd will follow the Hillary Clinton example after she fought with Obama during the primaries. Said enormously gracious things at the end of it and worked with it.
But she became the foreign minister after that. And
Yes, but the point is she still is.
Yes, that is the point.
But you see, they did work together, and that's the difference. And I think what you'll find from me, Kevin will behave. I think he'll be constructive, and yes, I think the party will move on. The other final thing quickly is that this for Julia Gillard is a turning point. It will give her clean air, and she'll have an opportunity to stand on her own 2 feet and build from here.
Yeah, you called it a cleansing ballot, which made it sound a bit like a nice cold beer at the end of the day, but it really didn't seem like that.
It was a bit like Epsom salts. It's been good.
Christine Milne.
Well, the Prime Minister had a decisive victory today. This is her opportunity, really, to now stamp her authority on this period. She's got a very creative parliament to work with, and the Greens are right there to work with her to deliver on things like Denticare, for example, deliver on gay marriage, deliver on Tasmanian forest. She could really run a very positive agenda because the parliament is there to work with her on that. And if she can actually go back to delivering on the big picture policies, roll out the carbon price and the renewables, I think that's what the community wants, to go back and get into delivering good policy and stop the infighting. And we're ready to deliver that if she's ready to do it.
Barnaby Joyce, the question was, will this leadership spill continue to haunt the Labor Party into the next election and beyond?
What can I say? Peter, cathartic is one word for it, self-immolation's another. Quite obviously, if they go forward with the policies that Christine just mentioned, they haven't got a hope. The big issue, there was a big discussion the night before the ballot, and people said that Gillard would win, and she did, that Kevin Rudd would get about 30 votes, and he did, and that Bill Shorten will mount a challenge in about 6 months' time, and he will. There is obviously... it's just fractious. You can't have a position where every person in your house is yelling and screaming at one another, yelling obscenities, throwing the furniture out into the lawn, kicking the cat, and then turning up and saying, oh, now we all get along well, it'll all be fine from here on in. Because it's not. It's going to be a recipe that is driven right from the source of the policy structure. I mean, that's really what brought this all on, the policy structure. And right at the heart of that policy structure is a design to apparently cool the planet with the carbon tax.
All right, more on that later. Chris Evans.
Well, I think Barnaby obviously doesn't have any family if he doesn't think these sorts of things go on, but the reality is the Prime Minister is greatly strengthened by today's result. She got a very, very strong endorsement from the caucus, and I think the reality is that the Labor Party had not dealt with this issue since July 2010. We needed to deal with it, and I think it'll be a very positive experience in the end. I don't want to sound Pollyanna-ish, but I think it will actually be...
Well, you do a bit. I mean, when you talk about families, you realise most murders are committed by someone you know.
That is true, but I think in a sense this has been hanging over us for a long time now. What we had is a very decisive result today. The Prime Minister was re-endorsed by a very large majority, and to be fair to Kevin, Kevin Rudd, he was very magnanimous in defeat. He pledged his support for Julia. He made it very clear he wouldn't challenge again. And I think everyone walked out of the room feeling a lot better than we had for a week or so.
Janet Albrechtsen.
Well, I'm sure that's right, Chris. I'm sure you felt better after the last week, but for it to be a positive experience, you know, I'd hate to think of what is negative, because I think it's been a dreadful week for Labor, and I don't think that Labor can recover. I think for so long as you have a former Foreign Minister, let alone a former Prime Minister, sitting on the back bench, who still harbours leadership ambitions, it is not going to be a pretty sight for Labor or indeed for any of us watching what's going to happen.
Lachlan Harris, and I might ask you this since you know him, do you think it's genuinely all over for Kevin Rudd?
I certainly don't think you'll see butting heads between Gillard and Rudd this term ever. I think that's over. It's not in Rudd's interest. There is no way, if Rudd was even seen to, there was a skerrick of evidence that he was doing anything to undermine Julia, it would be the end of his career. That's why you will not see it this term. And I think that definitely means clear air for Julia. I'm not quite as confident that means it's all over until the election time. I think she will have to improve to survive, but there's obviously a real opportunity that'll happen. I would argue that there is some deep, fundamental structural problems with Labor at the moment that need to be fixed before we can ever really get this virus out of the Labor Party. That means different ways of selecting MPs, different ways of selecting leaders. Now, that doesn't mean there's definitely going to be a challenge this year, but until those changes are made, they are the circuit breakers that need to make this virus stop. And until they're made, you could not be confident it won't happen again.
All right, there's plenty to talk about, lots of questions, and we'll go to our second one tonight. It's from Nicholas Gotsis.
The fighting Julia we've seen over the last couple of weeks, I think, is the Julia we really wanted to see. And it's the Julia we'd like to see battling the Mad Muck. Could this episode help the Labor Party move towards a more genuine relationship with the public?
Peter Biddy, you half answered that already, but I mean, give us your take on how Julia Gillard handled this past week.
Look, that was
apart from the fact that she pretty much put Kevin Rudd in his political grave.
Well, that was a very good question from a very intelligent person.
You related,
he's right. Yes, we are. He's my second cousin. The reality is
Queenslanders.
Listen, I even like Barnaby on occasion. It's all right. Yeah. The bottom line is that's correct. I think this is actually can turn out to be, and I think it will, one of the best things that could have happened to Julia Gillard. Now, that may sound strange, but she did engage with the Australian people in a way over the last few days that she hasn't previously. And I think out of that she'll get some strength. As Lachlan said before, she's got some free air, some open space to prove herself. You could almost see her growing in confidence. I saw her news conferences improve. I think the last 2 days have been improving. I thought today was a very significant contribution. I thought Rudd was very good today. So the answer to your question, cousin, is yes.
This is like the wonderful world of Disney. I mean,
Barnaby, you should come and join.
I must have been watching another program. I mean, honestly,
I'm worried about your TV.
She's come out and said that the government that she was actually the Deputy Prime Minister of was chaotic, ill-disciplined, purposeless, had no method. At the time, she said it was great. They're either lying before or they're lying now.
Well, they're talking about Abbott.
But the problem is they're still there. And they're just, all that's changed is their positioning. They're all still there, except for Mark Abib, who mysteriously has disappeared.
We will come to that. There's a question from the floor. We'll just, there's a gentleman with his hand up there.
I'd just like to point out that I think that why the Labor Party might have solid leadership now, the point is Australians are fed up with hearing internal politic debate, why they continue to ignore real policy.
Yeah, Christine Milne, you can respond to that, but also what do you think of the new and aggressive model of Julia Gillard, this new version of real Julia?
Well, let's hope it is. Let's hope it is the real Julia. And the problem here has been that we didn't have the real Kevin either. We had a celebrity persona, if you like, and both of them have taken on different personas at different times, and the community picked it straight away, and that's why they said, who is the real person leading us? So we need to have some engagement, from genuine, heartfelt engagement, and that means actually being passionate about something, believing in something, having some policy position to put forward. So I would totally agree. We've got on the table at the moment the Gonski report, for example. If Julia Gillard came out and said, I've spent my life campaigning for education, and I am going to free up $5 billion, and we are going to do this for Australian education, people would actually say, yes, there's some history there, yes, she's committed to education, yes, she's going to do something. But if she just sits there and says, oh, yes, we've got that, but we can't do it, and then Tony Abbott says, oh, it's aspirational, it's not going to happen, and then they continue to fight, the community go, well, what's that about? So I really think that the only way that there will be success, and the good thing is that we're working with a parliament that can deliver it, and that's the advantage of minority government, working with the Greens, we can actually deliver this. So let's get some progressive policy out there, and Gonski as well.
Today.
Do you want to expand on that?
Well,
What are you talking about? I'm worried about that.
Well, all the chaos we see is by reason that we have a government that doesn't have its own destiny in its own hands. It's controlled by a couple of independents and the Green.
All right, now, we'll come to that. There's a person down the front with their hands up. I want to hear from Lachlan Harris on the question that was asked first. We'll come to you in a moment. The fighting Julia that was just
I think
referred
she's
to.
done. Yeah, I think she's definitely performed quite well over the last couple of days, and I think there has been a kind of a truth-telling down there, which has some positive elements in terms of people talking about what they want to do in politics. But the whole, the personal attack stuff, I call it the neo-nuclear option. That has been a profound disaster for Labor. They had two big achievements, Labor, since 2007. Saving the country from the GFC and rebuilding schools. And unfortunately, in the process of trying to assassinate Rudd, they flushed both those achievements down the toilet. And legacy is not a renewable resource. And unfortunately, there was a massive sort of outbreak of legacy cannibalism, and that has really hurt Labor. And they're going to have to do a lot to clean that up somehow over the next 18 months.
Lachlan, how do you explain then that the primary vote went up 4 points in today's news poll? I mean, is it possible, for example, that the public are actually thoroughly sick of hearing these manufactured politicians? Suddenly they heard, even that was laden with hatred, they heard people saying what they really thought.
Look, it's very possible. I never get in the business of interpreting one poll or the other, particularly a kind of 4 points here or there. But I would, in the end, parties have legacies, and legacies are incredibly important things. Whether you like Kevin Rudd or Julia Gillard or anyone else, and Labor sacrificed a lot of their legacy this week, and that was a massive error. And they will pay a price for that in the future, unfortunately. And that's a price they're going to have to prepare themselves for come election
Chris
time.
Evans, are you prepared to pay that price that's just been referred to? Because we've never really seen anything quite like this. Senior cabinet ministers really destroying the reputation of a person who ought to have been a Labor hero, the person who got Labor back into power over John Howard.
Yeah, look, I don't agree with Lockie's analysis, but we do concede it was a really ugly week. It was very damaging for the Labor Party. No one's walking away from that. And I think people would have been much better being more circumspect and having the conversations internally rather than in the way they were conducted. But nevertheless, I think the Prime Minister comes out of this with a strong authority. The party has resolved an issue that didn't seem to want to go away. I think it is resolved. And the Prime Minister was very generous today about Kevin Rudd's legacy, and I think we tried to address those things. And as I say...
I've got to just interrupt you there. I mean, you're talking about authority over a group of people, that is, in the Cabinet, who didn't have self-restraint, as you've just admitted.
Well, it certainly got very willing. I guess I'm talking about authority that I think she can go out to the Australian public and not have to deal with this question about whether she is the leader or whether Kevin Rudd ought to be the leader. That's settled. That's over. Everyone accepts Julia Gillard is the Prime Minister. She's leader of the Labor Party and she'll take us to the next election. And I think that will allow her to communicate much more easily with the Australian public without this thing hanging over her, which, quite frankly, I think everyone understands has been there since the leadership change.
All right, well, before we go to Janet Albrechtsen, this lady had a hand up earlier.
Yes, my question is to the panel is, during the current leadership tussle, many ministers have stated how difficult and cumbersome the current political paradigm is. If the PM is so confident that her policies are right for Australia and her record bears a testimony to that, why not go to the people and ask them? Why not call an election and seek a more workable parliament?
Let's go to Janet Albrechtsen on this.
I think you've got it in a nutshell. I was talking to my children about this this morning, and my 15-year-old said, "Well, why don't we just hear from the people on this?" And I think that's exactly what needs to happen. Can I just take up something, though, that Chris said about self-restraint? And, there has been, I think, Tony, you mentioned there has been a lack of self-restraint here. There's a bigger problem, apart from the lack of self-restraint from Labor ministers. There's the fact that a number of senior Labor ministers, from the Prime Minister down, have basically admitted to lying to the Australian people about something rather important, and that is the nature of the person running the country. Now, that's a big lie, and they have admitted now that they should have told us about that in 2010. We're now hearing about it now. That is not something that people are going to forget, and therefore I don't think it's over.
Do you mean about the person who was running the country?
So
right? Post facto.
Correct, and that's a big lie, I think. And it's very hard now, I think, for anyone.
It's more like concealment than lying, is it?
Okay, well, you can call it what you like, but I think a lot of people will say, well, they should have told us the truth in 2010. They've waited all this long. If it was hard for us to believe what politicians said 7 days ago, I think the process now of us believing politicians is that much harder.
I think the big issue is that the feeling that I think everybody gets on the street is an absolute frustration with what's happened in politics. People are just over it. They're disgusted by it, and they want something cathartic to happen. They want an election.
I feel that, can I just expand?
Well, you can. We've got to get a microphone to you in order for you to do that. Just hang on. It's nearly there.
They feel that...
Sorry, it's not there. Just hang on for a second.
It's coming.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
They feel that the country is being held to ransom by a very small minority of people, i.e. the independents, and that good policy isn't really really happening in the parliament. What's getting through is a very small amount of policy, in fact, and Tony Abbott, in fact, hasn't been so negative. He has supported a lot of the
Okay, I've got to ask you, you're going into the comment area here. Are you a coalition voter, just by the way?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I'm going to go to another question in the audience. Jessica Amir.
Thank you. Rudd was elected by the people and Gillard by the caucus for the second time today, and she's assured us that that the drama is over. However, the ALP government, leadership, have done nothing but bring uncertainty in this very tumultuous economic climate. How can we be certain that confidence for us is going to be restored? And how do we know stability is going to come back?
Lachlan Harris, you indicated you're not sure stability will come back.
Look, I think in the end, in both parties, the reality is leadership instability is the new norm. So if you're hoping for this kind of world to come along where there's going to be a secure opposition leader, I mean, there's been how many opposition leaders in the last... I think there's been 7 or 8 leadership changes. I'm not on both sides, Barnaby. There is leadership instability is the new norm in Australian politics. Both parties need to change the way they elect leaders so that they're much harder to get rid of, because otherwise you're just going to see this over and over again.
Yeah, but there's a big difference. Nobody goes to an election to elect the leader of the opposition. They go to an election to elect the Prime Minister.
And they did.
And once they did, and you got rid of him.
No. Barnaby, you may have missed the 2000. You may have missed the 2010 election.
The next one, you didn't actually get more votes than us. It was appointed by Mr. Windsor and Mr. Oakeshott. So on both.
Can I just make a point? Can I just make the if I might say, the civilising point here, that had they agreed to form a government with you, you would also be in a minority government because you were debating with them to do exactly the same thing.
Well, I think the key issue there, though, is if you talk to the people of New England and Lyne, their belief overwhelmingly, and it's seen in the polling, is that they were going to get themselves a Conservative government on the election of the independents, not a Green Labor Party independent government.
They voted for independence.
They were the ones deceived, and now the whole of the Australian people have been deceived.
We had an election in 2010. Julia Gillard led the Labor Party to that election. We got a larger vote than the combined vote of the Liberal National Party and got the right to form a government. Sure, we relied on independence and the Greens.
Do you want to put your name to that? You got more votes than the coalition.
The 2PP was higher. And we've got to form a government. Now, the Liberals think they should have formed government. And they never got over it, and they still call today for elections or a change in the result. But the reality is, people focus a lot on the leadership change of the Labor Party. I understand that. But the last election, Julia Gillard led the Labor Party, sought support, and we got support, and were able to form a government. It's a legitimate government elected by the people. The Parliament represents the vote.
Okay, I'm sorry, but I'm going to bring us on. Excuse me,
government.
both of you, I'm going to bring us back to the actual question, which was actually about the instability now and whether you can, out of this mess, create stability. Peter Beattie.
Tony, can I actually answer the question that was asked? You raised the issue, you said that Kevin Rudd was elected by the people. Before that, he was elected by his caucus. And indeed, no leader offers themselves to the Australian people without being elected by the parliamentary party. So both Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard were elected by their caucus, then they go to the people. Both of them were elected by the people. Kevin Rudd in 2007, Julia Gillard in 2010. Yes, there was negotiations with the independents, but that's the way the system works. Now, in terms of stability, you now have a Prime Minister who won the ballot, 71 to 31. The last time that Tony Abbott got elected, he won by one vote. She won by 70. Just thought I'd mention that, one vote.
The big difference is that we're actually the opposition, you're the government.
Look, I love you because you're a Queenslander, but that doesn't give you the right to interject every 30 seconds. The point I'm trying to make is, we do give him extra latitude being a Queenslander. The point is
another one of Labor's strengths, patronage.
I got to tell you, it doesn't work with you, Barnaby. The point I'm trying to make is that we now have a unique opportunity to have stability in a way that we haven't had before. Everyone's got to accept that Australia voted, and I'll come back to your question, Australians voted for this parliament. It is up to the members to make this parliament work for 3 years, not for the convenience of political parties. This is what Australians voted for. It's up to the politicians to actually make what the people voted for 3 years. That's the term, not 18 months.
Okay, a series of hands up in the audience. We'll go to this gentleman here in the red shirt. Go ahead.
I think I'd like to disagree. I don't think Australians think they voted for this, and I'd like to ask the panel, do you think that independents and the Greens will be the big losers out of this instability? Because Australians pretty clearly don't like what's going on.
Christine Milne.
No, I don't. I think Australians actually want people in a parliament to work together to deliver policy outcomes. And if you look at this period of government, there is a real concern across the country about climate change. There was disgust about the fact that neither of the major parties were prepared to take any really serious action on it. And we have delivered, in this period of government, a significant change. It's a major economic reform. It's something that's been achieved by people of different persuasions sitting around the table and working it through. And it will be the basis of the whole transformation in the Australian economy. And that is something that is essential if we're to stay competitive, if we're to lift productivity, rebuild manufacturing. There are so many good things coming, and we have to work to deliver those. If you had had a majority government of either persuasion, you would not be having a Clean Energy Finance Corporation with $10 billion going into renewables. We would be way out of those races.
A brief comment.
On that, I absolutely agree with Christine Milne. If we hadn't had the government held to ransom by the Greens and the Independents, we wouldn't have $10 billion going to some green corporation and a carbon tax. And I hope they talk about a carbon tax all the way to the election, and I hope they keep Ms Gillard there.
OK, we've got another question up the back there. Gentleman with his hand up, we'll go to you.
Yep. There's a great disparity between what the caucus want and what the people want. It's a time that we move towards a direct democracy where basically the people elect who the leaders are, as opposed to the representative, where a small group of people have a lot of power to decide who the leader is.
Presidential system.
Lachlan Harris.
I think parties have the right to elect their leader, and I think there's probably room certainly within Labor. I don't know much about the Liberal system, and there's certainly within Labor they must reform so that Labor Party members have a say in who's going to be the leader of the party. And it's not because the previous system worked well, but the game's changed. Unfortunately, things are so rough now, the way the media cycle has changed, the way that professional politicians interact with each other and their relationships, that system no longer works. Labor Party members need to be used to effectively act as a bit of a restraint. That's the lesson from the last 2 years, is we cannot leave it up to caucus anymore. Labor Party members need a say in that thing. I'm not sure that it should be extended to the full community, but absolutely within Labor, members should have a say in who's the leader.
I'm going to interrupt you there because we have, and the rest of the panel can respond to this, we have a video question on this subject. It comes from Andrew Clifton in Branxton, New South Wales.
The absolute anarchy in the government over the past few months, years, demonstrates the fundamental problem with Australian politics. We, the people, do not get to choose our country's leaders. The Coalition are no better. Does the panel believe it is time for a significant change in the way our country's leaders are elected? Should we have primary elections?
Janet Albrechtsen, let's start with you.
Look, I do like the primary system, watching what's been happening in America over the last month or so, particularly.
You'd have to have a republic first in order for us to have presidential-style primaries in Australia, wouldn't you?
Correct, and there was a wonderful letter in The Australian today which said, we're really not ready for a republic, are we, children? Which I thought summed up very nicely what's happened over the last week. You're right, we wouldn't need a republic. But the thing about the primary system is that it sorts through all of this stuff. We would have had a very clear understanding of who Kevin Rudd was. We would have had a very clear understanding of who Julia Gillard was, and so on. And that the filtering process that's been happening in the United States, I think, you know, for us as voters, is very helpful. But having said that, I'm not ready for that kind of enormous change. I think Lachlan is right that it would be a huge advantage if we could just get party members voting on leaders.
Just before you do that, I'm going to come to Peter Beattie, because this was a proposal put before the ALP conference that there should be primary voting for MPs, in other words, for candidates for individual seats.
National Party already has it.
We'll come to you in a minute. It didn't get up. Should it get up? I mean, is it time to start rethinking this in order to break the power of the factions?
Look, I've spent most of my last 4 years living in the United States, and I've followed the 2 primary seasons. I actually support the concept of primaries. I think that does broaden out the base of the party, and I see that as a means of increasing it. But there are weaknesses in it. If you look at the amount of money that is spent in the primaries, it is obscene. I have an association with Clemson University, and I watched the South Carolina primary, and every ad break it was wall-to-wall commercial for the different political candidates running it for the president. There was not one other commercial, and they spent millions. I mean,
Are you saying that the richest candidates would likely win in local seats?
That's what's wrong with the system. You've got to watch it very carefully. President Obama is going to spend $1 billion getting re-elected. $1 billion. You cannot have a system where money buys your politicians, because if you do, then you just wreck the whole concept of democracy. Australia has a really good democracy. I think sometimes we actually don't understand how well off we are if you look at the rest of the world, and sometimes we get a little bit inward looking. We should look at the world and say, thank God for Australia.
But you hear why people are confused, and we have a presidential-style election campaign, we're presidential-style Prime Minister, and then you get rid of him through the caucus, and then you have another election campaign, and there's another attempt to get rid of that Prime Minister. It seems apparently wrong to a lot of people.
There's a way to avoid that, and Lachlan's right about this. What you do is you say to the party membership, like they do in the British Labor Party, you can actually choose the leader. So in other words, you do not get thrown out. I mean, there'll be a debate about this, but you can work that system.
We've got a single-member constituency system. It's served Australia very well. Our democracy has been very strong for over 100 years, and the primaries is one debate, but that's quite different to what's been suggested here. There's only one party I know of who's had the election of leader by the membership in Australian politics. Do you remember the Democrats? That worked really well, didn't it? That worked really well. There are no simple solutions to that. Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd are 2 of the most prominent politicians of their generation, both highly capable people. There's been a contest. That's what happens in politics.
They've both been destroyed.
But I don't said about them last week.
I don't. Well, it is actually. It is actually what I've said about both of them. And I don't agree with Lockie's sort of doomsday view of the world. That wasn't his view when he was working for Kevin Rudd, but I mean, I understand he's talking about changes that are going on in Australian politics. I think that's right, but we ought not underestimate the strength of our democracy. The suggestion that the Parliament wasn't putting legislation through is just wrong, factually wrong. We've got things like the carbon price through the Parliament. We've got things like the mining tax about to go through. We've been very effective as a legislature in this period. So some of the claims are just not right, and I actually think we're running down our own democracy. It's ugly, it's not perfect, etc. But it actually...
You did that.
Senator Joyce, I remember when you had your leadership struggles only, 2 years ago? When a leader was overthrown because he just wanted to honour the policy you took to the election.
You've just been on display with the most disgusting approach. You've completely dragged our democratic process through the mud. We're back now to, you'd want obscenity. Obscenity is a whole heap of people who these people never voted for, having a huge decision about who our Prime Minister is. That's obscenity. And on the primaries, we do have primaries. They had one in the seat of Tamworth. The National Party had one.
OK, we've got a gentleman with his hand up, just shot up there.
Hasn't the minority government we have now shown that it has, in some aspects, strengths of what the Howard government had when it was in control of both the House of Representatives and the Senate?
I'm sure that Christine Milne will respond yes, and Barnaby just will respond no.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
Well, I don't know whether Barnaby will.
When John Howard had control of both houses, he dismantled the committee system in the way that we had it. There were no checks and balances, and it was what cost him the election, actually, the next time. The absolute power that he had, people saw what that was about and immediately shifted to change it. The great thing about having a number of parties and having people negotiate is that you actually get buy-in. You get some real discussion about policy happening, then you get ownership of that policy and you deliver it, and you can, once you've owned it, you keep it. You don't threaten to have it repealed. The problem we've got, and nobody's talking here about Tony Abbott, what we've now got is an opportunity in Australia for the real pressure to come on Tony Abbott to say, what is it that the coalition actually stands for? Not as what they are going to oppose all the time, oppose the mining tax, but they've got this $70 billion black hole. Where are they going to get the money from? If they're not going to do the disability insurance scheme, if they're not going to do money into public education, or if they are going to do it and honour the tax cuts, where are they raising the money from?
All right.
And so this really needs to be...
Barnaby Joyce has to respond to that, but I want to move on quickly after that.
Discussion.
Well, first of all, we lost the election because we did have control of both, and then what happened then was work choices went through and we lost, and we accept the admonishment of the Australian people, and now the Green Labor Party Independent Alliance has control of both houses, and they're going to destroy themselves with the carbon tax. Now, with the black hole issue that you've just brought up, it's not a $70 billion black hole. That's
how big is it?
Have
you got a seriously? Have you got a final figure in the tens of billions?
That is an association to the revenue stream, not taking.
What is it?
Well, if you took out, for instance, the carbon tax, we'd actually make money. If you took out you're the only people who've brought. Because I say
how are you paying for everything?
I could answer it if you stop talking.
With politics.
Okay.
But anyway, and if you
just a simple answer. If it's not $70 billion, what is it?
We would actually, you'd actually make money if you got rid of the carbon tax.
There's a reason you no longer finance
I'm predicting we're not going to get an answer, so I'm going to move along to our next question, which comes from Len Radomski.
Prime Minister Julia Gillard has been proved to be less than honest with her dealings in her dealings with the Australian public. Now, a number of her senior cabinet ministers have been so vociferous in their combined and planned condemnation of Kevin Rudd that they have acted in a manner totally unbecoming of the positions they hold, dragging the institution of Parliament and politics to a new and disgraceful low. How can anyone trust them with our future and the running of the government of our country?
Chris Evans.
Thanks for that. Look, the Prime Minister's made it clear that we've had a really unfortunate period, and the language used and the arguments. Well, I mean, we're honest about it. It was not pretty, and a few of my colleagues should have shown more restraint. But we had not resolved this issue. This issue had been hanging around since the change of leadership in 2010. People didn't have it explained to them as to why that leadership change had occurred. People were confused about that. I understand that. And we at the time basically made the decision that Kevin would stay on the front bench and we try and get on with the business, as it were. And that, in hindsight, was probably a mistake. And Julia's had to wear that for all the period of her leadership. I think now, while it has been ugly, and it's I can understand people's disappointment with it, I do think this gives us a chance to move on. And I do think that the government can continue with its agenda, which is strongly focused about the economy, education, health, and we are capable of continuing that agenda and achieving really good things. So we're very confident about the way forward, but I understand that people haven't been terribly impressed with some of the behaviour, and you just got to be frank about that.
Lachlan Harris.
Look, I think I made my position clear before on those comments. I would say one thing is I wouldn't. It's a great problem for Labor, what's happened over the last couple of days. It's not a terminal sort of cancer in democracy, I don't think. If there was a way of... I think both parties are really challenged by this problem about choosing leaders and maintaining discipline and sticking with them, basically. And I would argue they're pretty simple fixes there that are at least worth experimenting with. I don't think we should sort of get hysterical about it and talk about the end of democracy sort of thing. I think the reality is there's some structural problems. Both parties need to fix them. I think they can do that. And we can get back to we can maintain our very, very strong democracy, which I accept we have.
And Janet Albrechtsen, I'll just get you to quickly respond.
I think there's a very easy way. We don't need to move to a primary system. We don't actually have to do a lot of structural change at all. What we need to do is stop saying to ourselves, oh, it's only politics, when politicians lie, when they mislead, when they behave badly towards their colleagues, when they behave in a manner which businessmen running big businesses, even small businesses, are not allowed to behave in that manner. Why do we accept that politicians somehow have a lower standard when it comes to behaving? And we do. And that's to all the politicians here. Lift the standards.
A strong point. We'll go to Claire King for our next question.
The vicious and defamatory comments made by some MPs and journalists would not be tolerated in any other workplace or even in a school playground. So should we not call upon these very influential people to take responsibility for what they've said and apologise?
Chris Evans.
Well, I think I've tried to answer that at the last
well, no,
last
you didn't
question.
actually say. I mean, there's a very specific question there. It's should the people who inflamed the passions last week apologise? Specifically, should they apologise to Kevin Rudd, I suppose?
Well, I think we've seen the start of that sort of reconciliation process. Kevin, as I say, was very generous in his remarks today. He did directly address some of the concerns that have been raised about him.
Well, he offered to apologise, but the other people, the anti-Rudd people, didn't offer an apology. Is that coming?
Well, the only two people spoke at the caucus meeting.
No, but over the next week, will we get an apology from Wayne Swan, from Stephen
one of the things that did occur is there was discussion among the players there. The hands were shaken. There was a sense of we have to work together. And as I say, Kevin was generous. The Prime Minister was very generous to Kevin. Kevin talked about having a cup of tea with a few of the people who'd had a bit to say about him.
So he's a happy Vegemite again.
I don't know if he's a happy Vegemite, but I mean, there was a realisation in the caucus that we had to mend this. And there was a broad commitment to that, I think. And as I say, people walked out much happier than they walked in, not in terms, that wasn't about the result, just the mood and the sense of resolve and having to bring this back together was very strong.
I think it's a case of not apologising to each other. It might be a case of apologising to the Australian people, I think, for how you carried on.
Can I just make one point? We got a sort of a belated apology in the form of a resignation from one of the key factional bosses, Senator Mark Arbib. He seems to be going because of his role in toppling Julia Gillard in the coup in the first place, if what he says is to be believed. Do you know why he's going, Chris Evans?
Well, I had a chat to him today. He spoke to the Prime Minister, then he spoke to me, and he was very honest with me, and he covered that in his press conference. I think Mark had a range of issues that were preying on his mind, including the fact that he's been constantly represented as a sort of faceless man, despite being an elected member of Parliament, being a minister, having his face in the papers and on TV regularly. I think he felt that he was having difficulty getting over the top of that, and that it might be better for the Labor Party if he left.
So was it actually preying on his mind that he participated or helped organise the coup against Kevin Rudd? Because he seems to be saying he's resigned because he's trying to give the party a chance to heal over the issues that happened over the last 18 months. Well, that goes back to the coup.
I think he said he stood by his involvement in the leadership
So
change.
what does he think needs to be healed?
Well, I think he sees that this whole argument about faceless men, the whole way he is presented, he's a very able young man who had a big contribution to make. I argued with him that he shouldn't go. I think he's got a lot to contribute. But he thought he was doing the right thing by the party. And he thought it would help in the broader healing process. Now, I don't actually agree with that. I actually think he had a lot to offer, and I'm sorry to see him go.
A lot of people have been tweeting about the surprise resignation of Senator Mark Arbib, like this one from Tweet Frankie. Real question for Q&A, why did Arbib really go?
It's always... what I find... Sorry, Barnaby, can I just make a point? And I know you'll disagree with me. The point about this is, I think anyone who knows Mark Arbib knows he's a very genuine, decent person. Forget all this faceless men nonsense. I mean, he was elected, as Chris said. I actually believe what he said. He actually he mentioned his family. He's got 2 young daughters. He was concerned about actually them growing up without him being there. He was never at home. He, in fact, was accepting responsibility and taking, I think, the opportunity to use his resignation as a bit of a circuit breaker. Here's someone who actually acted in a really noble way, and we get an enormous amount of cynicism. Now, I understand why people are cynical about politicians, but here's someone who actually did the right thing.
Okay, but
we should at least give him credit for it.
The reason,
You know,
quite obviously, they're cynical about it is because we want to believe him. We really do want to believe
Barnaby,
him.
get off.
But quite,
You know, you
but
really
quite
want to believe
obviously,
in my
for
foot.
everything that's happened in the past, we can't, because every time we think we're told the truth, we find out that we're lied to. So, I mean, that's the problem. You've destroyed the capacity of the community to take you seriously. I want to believe...
Don't say
Mark
we, Paleface, you're part of this issue.
Okay, I want to hear from Christine Milner,
Yeah.
because you were nodding at that.
Look, I think it's true, and I'd like to go back to the question that was just asked about personal responsibility for the way you behave. And the thing is, the community knows that when politicians say they're leaving to spend time with their family, it's a euphemism for why they're going. There's some other reason, and that's always been the case. Now, it's absolutely...
I think that's unfair.
No, just a moment. Let me finish.
You shouldn't say that, Adam, with no evidence of it.
With Mark, I have no idea whether this is the case.
Christine. That's just unfair to him and his family.
No,
You
just
shouldn't
a
say
moment. I think it's absolutely the case that people in politics really struggle to balance family and politics. That is absolutely true, and it takes a big toll on family, and I've got absolutely no doubt. When Mark was talking about his family, that is absolutely the case. So I'm not saying that isn't the case, nor am I saying that it isn't true that the need to heal as a result of what's occurred over the last couple of years is essential. However, I'm also saying that right out there in the Australian community, people are asking the question, is this a euphemism for something else? Which goes to what Barnaby's saying, is that the currency is so devalued now that everybody in politics has got a responsibility to lift their game in terms of being very upfront with the Australian people about what's going on.
Doesn't it also tell us just how venomous the last week, probably a longer period, but we've only seen it in the open for the last week, how venomous, how poisonous it has been that one of the hard men of the New South Wales right has decided to leave. He was a man who was marked as a future leader, very impressive, very competent, very smart, and he is packing up his bags and he's going, he's had enough. I think that tells you a lot. I was just saying earlier that I think I heard the case that Barry Jones was describing the last week as more toxic than the split with the DLP in the 1950s. Now, that's quite an extraordinary thing to say, and it's especially extraordinary if you consider that the split now within Labor is not over ideas, it's not over a philosophical argument, it's purely about personalities and power. And I think that's why, Labor going forward is not in a great position.
Lachlan Harris.
Look, I've had my fair share of arguments with Mark Arbib, and we've been on very, very different sides of most arguments over the last couple of years to do with Labor leadership. But I think the man deserves basically to be taken at his word. If there's no evidence out there, I think it's very, very harsh.
All right, let's take him at his word. And what is he saying when he says he has to leave to help heal the party? What's that all about?
Look, I think it's if he feels boxed into the faceless man thing. Like I don't want to defend Mark Arbib's decision. I have no idea why he's left, but I think it is absolutely unfair just because someone's a politician and someone's involved that if they leave, then there must be a conspiracy. There's no evidence of it. It's not fair. That's my first point. My second point, I guess, is this idea that I don't think something's changed in the last week with this viciousness that we've seen. All we've done is pull away the veil. My point is that was a mistake to pull away the veil. These leadership battles on our side, on your side, Barnaby, have always been brutal, have always been ugly. The mistake Labor made was just pulling away the veil for a second. I mean, I kind of got to the end of the week and I missed the faceless men. Bring back the trench coats and smoky rooms. That was the mistake. But these things have
here's the
always
puzzling
been
thing.
brutal.
We mentioned it earlier. They pulled back the veil. It was very ugly, and the primary vote went up. And it's very puzzling. Will it go back down again? Do you think?
I'm not in the business of predicting polls, so I don't care about polls.
That in any leadership challenge, the whole world focuses on two people, Kevin Rudd, in this case Julia Gillard, and therefore there is a belief that that is the political game, and between the combined vote of the two takes your vote up, but now they know that one of them's gone, and you watch the next lot of polling.
Okay, we've got this gentleman down the front who's got his hand up.
I know we'd all love them to be all transparent and tell us the truth, but politics has always been pretty brutal. I mean, did not Caesar turn around and say, "Et tu, Brute"?
Yeah, we'll take that as a comment. Now, remember, you can send us your web or video questions. The address is on the screen to find out how to do that. Our next question is a video. It comes from Ben Peake in Coburg, Victoria.
Hello. My question is for Lachlan Harris. Your old boss has been planning to get back into the leadership for quite a while now. How important is backgrounding friendly journalists in this process, and to what extent are the press as a whole players in the political game rather than just reporters of it?
Lachlan Harris.
Look, it's an interesting question. I wrote on the weekend that every Labor leader, and you can insert Liberal leader in there, has climbed to the leadership over the carcass of their predecessor, and that will never change, basically. I don't think you've seen the backgrounding. There's nothing new in that, and there is no innocent party on either side. The finger-pointing that's been going on, it's ridiculous. That is just a normal part of politics in both parties.
Wasn't Gough Whitlam just beamed down from heaven?
No.
That's the impression you get if you listen to Labor history.
I don't think... I think there's nothing new in that. What I do think is interesting is, I think, politics in general, as basically as news disappears and you just get this ferocious opinion cycle developing, what's happened is that is overwhelming the capacity of the parties to kind of withstand these assaults. So I'm not accusing journalists of making anything up, but the reality is they are very, very influential players, or they're a very key element in driving leadership disputes.
And the question was very specifically, hang on just for 1 second, how important is backgrounding friendly journalists in the process? I mean, you've been in this process. So
I've never been involved in backgrounding against any Labor, and that's not really the role. That's not, press secretaries don't do that. That's principals do that.
But do you think that's what was going on?
I think that's always. I mean, backgrounding has always been part of the game. I think the difference is that the parties used to be strong enough to withstand this sort of stuff, and they no longer are. And that's the problem. Is basically it's too easy to do this. That's the fundamental problem. It's too easy to get rid of these people, or to undermine Julia Gillard or Kevin Rudd or whoever the next leader is.
It's interesting that Julia Gillard put the challenge out at one of the many press conferences we've seen over the last few days, where she said she gave permission to any journalist to disclose whether she had been backgrounding against Kevin Rudd. Right?
I mean, this whole idea, like, politics is a very ugly profession, and you pull away the veil and you're going to see all this stuff. There's nothing new. Nothing new has happened in this leadership debate that didn't happen in the one between Nelson and Turnbull, or Beazley and Rudd, or any of this. There's nothing new in any of this.
Except for the public displays of
the public pulling away the veil. The on-the-record stuff was new, and I think it was a great mistake. But there's been no change.
So you think they should continue lying? Don't pull the veil off. Just keep telling us that
No,
Kevin
I'm
Rudd's
the opposite.
a top
I
bloke,
say don't pull the veil up for half of it. That was a mistake. Bring on primaries. Allow this to happen outside the.
Don't pull the veil all the way up, just sort of half the way up.
No, I'm saying the opposite. Have a primary.
Careful
Let
if
these
you start
elections
from
be done
the
in
bottom,
public.
Barnaby. Now, Chris Evans, you wanted to get involved in
I just was picking up the point about, you try and set the scene about one poll in the Australian. I mean, part of the problem is we have a poll every 3 or 4 days. People's voting intentions don't change by 4% in a week. I don't believe that anything that happened in today's paper is reflective. I don't think we will do well out of the last week. I mean, no one can believe that. But we want to. Lockie's point is right in the sense that you and others will interpret the one poll and try and explain it all by what happened that week on the insiders' argument about politics.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you really think the people who are trying to garner votes for Julia Gillard weren't pointing out to all those MPs the primary vote went up by 4 points in this poll?
Well, I don't think anyone in politics who's been around for a while would suggest to you that the Labor vote went up 4 points in the last week. I mean, is anyone seriously going to argue that? No. I'm not.
No, I'm not. Peter Betty, let's go back to the question that was asked from the video questioner, and that was about the backgrounding of journalists and what role the media play in these kind of things, in these kind of leadership crises. What's your thought? You've been a political leader. You must have some thoughts about that.
Look, anyone who thinks that the media aren't key players in this game is delusional. The reality is, unless you can get a favourable position up about your candidate or what your policy position is, then frankly you're not going to get your story out. And I don't see anything wrong with that. I mean, who do the journalists talk to? They talk to the audience. Who do they write for? They write for the audience. So in a sense, they actually are informing people. The issue is how you do it. There's nothing wrong with saying to a journalist, look, my candidate, if you look at the figures, is more likely to get the party re-elected than your candidate. I don't see that as any big deal. And if you're sitting around backgrounding on that basis, what's wrong with that? That's hardly something that's, subterranean or hidden. So look, there is a healthy relationship. Oh, only about you, Barnaby. There is a healthy relationship. there is a healthy relation, Barnaby and old friends, there's a healthy relationship between journalists and politicians. There's an unhealthy relationship, but it's one that will always be there. It's a fact of life, and the answer to the question is yes.
OK, but in this case, and I'll come to you in a minute, Christine, sorry. In this case, what Kevin Rudd was accused of publicly by senior cabinet members is treachery. That is, backgrounding journalists and leaking information or causing information to be leaked during an election campaign. Is that the thing, the accusation, which is the most unforgivable as far as the caucus is concerned?
Look, I think I agree with some of the comments that were made before by Chris. I think a lot of the comments that were made publicly by various leaders of the party, ministers, as much as I respect them and like them, were really beyond the pale. I think we were unwise to denigrate Kevin Rudd. I think some of the allegations that were made were unhelpful. Yes, what he was accused of, I think, was damaging. But frankly, when you've got a very heated contest for leadership, some of that is inevitable. I wish we'd behaved in a more dignified way.
OK, we've just got a person with their hand up there. I'll just quickly take your question.
Just wondering, how can cabinet ministers be effective like Anthony Albanese when he doesn't support his own leader?
Yeah, that is an interesting question. Chris Evans, Anthony Albanese, very passionate press conference himself, in tears part of the time, obviously disagreed, like you do, with the comments made by some of his friends. Then he came out and supported the man who just lost the ballot.
Well, I thought Anthony gave a very honest press conference when he talked about the dilemmas that he was confronting. And I know he's very upset about the sort of tenor of the language and the comments that were made. But the reality is there's a bigger purpose. We're members of the Australian Labor Party. It's a huge privilege to serve as a minister, and people will get back to working together to provide good governance in this country. I have a hugely privileged position as a minister, and I think all of our ministers understand that, and they know that after a bitter leadership ballot, you've got to get back on, get together and do the job. And that happened under Hawke Keating, it happened under all the other leadership challenges. The reality is you've got to get back to work and work with the person in charge, and Anthony will continue to be a very effective minister for Julia Gillard. OK, we've got time to take one more question. It's from Tim Evans.
Thanks, Tony. Considering the recent ALP leadership turmoil and the clear public dislike to the way the party is representing themselves, you would expect Tony Abbott to be miles ahead as preferred PM, and this doesn't appear to be the case. When is Malcolm Turnbull going to take his rightful place as leader? and lead the party to victory in the next election?
That's a very good question.
Barnaby Joyce, let's start with you, Barnaby.
For leather jacket wearers.
Well, the first thing is, of course, that the main concentration of the Australian public in an election is to elect the Prime Minister. No one actually goes in there to elect an opposition leader. The next thing is that if I had a choice between a more popular leader in a losing team or a less popular leader in a winning team, I'm going to take the less popular leader in the winning team. And what we look at is the reflection of the overall is that the Australian people believe that what the coalition is offering, obviously, is a far better product than what the Labor Party has delivered to us. And the evidence for that is in the last week. And who in their right mind would buy that package unless you're completely and utterly out of your tree?
Can I say just one quick follow-up question? I will come around very quickly because we need to hear from everyone on this. But Barnaby Joyce, why isn't Tony Abbott actually doing better in his personal polling at a time when the Labor Party is trashing its brand?
Well, when you look at the coalition polling, we are ahead. And I mean,
no, I mean his personal polling.
Well, it's politics is not a personality contest. It's a contest. Well, it's not. I mean, people always say, "Well, you need positive polls." We've got them. We've got them out there, but we can't get daylight because every time we try to get out about dams or about zonal taxation or about inland rail, all these things that we are going to do, what happens is the Labor Party come up with another catastrophic train wreck and just suck all the oxygen out of the place.
OK, Christine Mills.
I've got to say, that's a great...
Well, I certainly take your point, and it's absolutely true that Malcolm Turnbull is a lot more popular than Tony Abbott, and I think what we're going to now see is a lot of focus on the coalition and what they actually stand for, because I think the Australian people aren't actually proactively choosing Abbott and the coalition. They've been reacting to a lot of things that the Labor Party have been doing rather than proactively choosing the other way. And I actually think there's a very good chance that Abbott won't lead the coalition into the next federal election next year, and that we will see a shift when they have to actually put actual information into their policy, and it's not all just a no, 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 no. when they actually have to say how they are going to address the big issues facing Australia, because they've shown no capacity to do so right from the global financial crisis.
I'm going to have to cut you off because we need to hear from all the panellists briefly.
I'll be brief.
Yep.
Can I say I agree with the question. The fact that the Labor Party has had its internal divisions for leadership have removed any opportunity to focus on Tony Abbott and his performance. If you have a look at figures, we've been talking about Julia's figures, have a look at Tony Abbott's figures. They are not good. And I agree with Christine. I very seriously doubt if the Labor Party can get its act together and the focus goes on Tony Abbott, I doubt if he'll be the leader at the next federal election.
Janet Albrechtsen.
I think that's delusional. I think it's Tony Abbott who's taken the fight up to Kevin Rudd. He's taken the fight up to Julia Gillard. I mean, look at the party polling. Put the personal I know it's hard for a politician to put personal polling to one side.
Well, look at what the Australians do.
Look at the party polling for the Liberal Party, the coalition, compared to Labor. Labor's bumping her out on 30%. OK, it's moved a bit this week. You know, who knows 35. What the trend is. OK, well, let's wait and see if that, is an upward trend, Peter. I doubt it is after last week. I think it's the party vote that counts, and I think, Tony Abbott is responsible for that, and the likelihood of Malcolm Turnbull leading at the next election is farcical.
Chris Evans.
Well, I think there's an active discussion inside the Liberal Party about Tony
Don't you love the way that everybody knows
drag
about the
on their
active
vote.
discussion, but the person who's actually in the party and we're not actually having it?
OK, we're nearly out of time. Sorry, Barnaby.
Clearly no one's talking to Barnaby.
Barnaby, I think you've forgotten you're actually in the National Party and you pretend to be independent. But that's how subservient you become. You've forgotten you're the leader of the National Party.
The number you're winning on is a debt. It's just absolutely, you're winning that debt.
I'm sorry, we're nearly out of time. We please have to finish.
Bottom line is Tony Abbott is a drag on the Liberal vote, and Liberal senators I know are already discussing whether or not they can survive that.
Oh, Barnaby.
Lachlan Harris, final word.
Look, I agree. In the end, I think Labor's got one secret weapon, and it is Tony Abbott. He should have won the 2010 election. Labor basically almost handed it to him, and the fact he didn't win it is a big warning sign for the Libs.
This is called playing tactics. So they're doing it right now.
OK,
that's all rubbish, but they say it anyhow.
That's all we have time for, Barnaby Joyce. Please thank our panel: Peter Beattie, Christine Milne, Barnaby Joyce, Chris Evans, Janet Albrechtsen, Lachlan Harris. Thank you. Next week, Q&A is live from the Adelaide Festival. And we can do that now the leadership spills happen, with award-winning actor and Australian of the Year Geoffrey Rush, Conservative commentator and essayist Mark Stein, former Howard Government Minister Amanda Vanstone, Chinese-American writer and presidential advisor Zhang Jingzha, and the star of Terry Gilliam's Brazil and Harold Pinter's The Caretaker, Jonathan Price. We'll see you then. For more on today's politics, stay tuned for a special edition of Late Line, live from Canberra. Until next week, we'll see you. Good night.